All right, we've got a lot to cover. A lot of very, very interesting stuff which I've never seen before, and it's actually fascinating. So for this class today, if you have a Chumash in front of you, a Sefer Shemot, it will be really helpful, because to see it out inside is very different than seeing it outside. There's quite a lot of psukim, so I actually didn't make a sheet today, a source sheet, because there's quite a lot of psukim we have to read through. So if you have a Sefer Shemot, highly recommend it. Okay, so this is really a two-part series. Last week and this week, it's really a three-part series, but next week we actually have a special class of our annual pre-Pesach panel, who Aaron was an integral part of last year, and featuring Rabbi Rosenblatt, Rabbi Fegelslak, and myself. The topic is the mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, then and now, and its relevance today. So that will be next week at 7 p.m. in place of this class. We did speak about last week a couple of very interesting questions, and I left you with a final question. So we asked 4 questions last week. Just to have a very brief recap. Question number 1 is, we have a mitzvah of Vehigata Levincha. You have an obligation to tell over to your children the Pesach story of the Exodus, essentially, on the night of each of Leil HaSeder. And the question is, how are you supposed to do it? Why is this night different to all other nights? Simply in the relating of the story. That means we know every night there's an obligation to speak over the Yetziat Mitzrayim. We say every day in Kriyat Shema, twice a day. What is special and unique about the night of Pesach? That's question number 1. We spoke about the concept Elo Tshuva. You first have to have a question and then have an answer. Like every teacher will tell you, if you want the student to be able to really kind of get the answer properly, if you pose it in the form of a question, it will be much more hit home, much better. That's one point. The second question was, when are you supposed to do it? What's the question? Night of Pesach. Well, we brought it in the Haggadah. It says, Yachol miRosh Chodesh. I would have thought that we begin it from Rosh Chodesh. Then the Gemara says, no, or we look at the Haggadah. Actually, we're supposed to do it not from Rosh Chodesh, but on the day. And I would have thought it would be earlier on the day. Tamud Lomar, B'sha'ah shematzah maror munachim lefanecha. Typically, when matzah and maror are in front of you, that is when you are supposed to go ahead and say the Pesach. The other question was, besides for the when, but on what are you supposed to discuss? We spoke about, are you supposed to speak out the story of the Exodus? Well, what else? Well, if you look at sources, and we quoted the question of the Chacham, one of the 4 sons, and the answer which we give the Chacham as like, what is all this about, is in fact, En maftir nachar Pesach afikoma. You know what? There's a specific halacha in Korban Pesach that you don't eat anything after Korban Pesach. That is what we need to know, and that's what we tell the Chacham. It sounds like that is almost the obligation of the night. Is that true? The obligation is to relate the halachot of, pertaining to Pesach. I mean, seemingly, it's not what we do. It's not what the Haggadah is all about. And the 4th question was, when did Yetziat Mitzrayim actually start? That means, in order to relate the story, every story has a beginning and an end. If you have a beginning and an end, then you can kind of figure out what the middle is. But what is the story? Did the story begin in the Brit Ben HaBetarim, in the covenant between Abraham and God? which happened 400 years before, according to Tosfot. That's how we started counting from then until they actually went out. Was it perhaps from Briat HaOlam, from the creation of the world? The first Rashi in the Torah says, Bereshit bishvil Yisrael shenikra Reshit. If they were coming out of Egypt in order to stand in front of the mountain, the foot of the mountain, to receive the Torah, so perhaps the beginning of the story is from the beginning of creation. So maybe we should start there. All right. So maybe we can kind of figure out where it starts, but where does it end? Does it end when we came out of Egypt? Does it end from the Kriyat Yam Suf, where, the end of the 7 days? But if you look at Dayenu, we actually say, Ve'ilu hichnisanu le'eretz Israel v'lo natan lanu bet ha'bechira. If you would have taken us to Israel and not given us the Bet Mikdash, Dayenu, which sounds like the end goal is not only not Mitzrayim, not only not Kriyat Yam Suf, not only going to Eretz Israel, but maybe Binyan Bet HaMikdash. So again, to frame the question, what is the beginning? What is the end? That is what our obligation is. You have to have a storyline. What is the storyline? I mentioned last week that the 4 statements relating to Geula, we always have this symbolic number of 4 sons, 4 cups of wine, 4 leshonot of Geula, 4 questions of Manishtana. So many number 4s, whole discussion in its own right. But perhaps those are the 4 angles over here, which is all relating to the Hitzalti, the Hotzeti, the Hitzalti, the Ga'alti, the Lakachti, all coming out of Egypt. There is a 5th cup, which many people have the custom. Question is, the Sfaradim have this custom or not? Different communities. The cup of Eliyahu Navi, which symbolizes the 5th expression of Geula, Veheveti, when God will bring us to the ultimate Geula. When Eliyahu Navi Yevaser al Mashiach Tzidkenu, where Eliyahu Navi will prophesize, will let us know in 3 days before Mashiach comes. Don't worry, Mashiach's coming. Bet Mikdash is coming. Maybe that is the final Geula, and the Geula actually hasn't happened. It started, but we're kind of still in the moment. We're still in the middle of this whole story, which kind of really fits into the theme of Chayav Adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. That we have to look at the whole story of Egypt and say, 1 second, we're in the middle of the movie. We are active players. We are active. We are actors in the scenario of it. And it's such a beautiful way of looking at it. And when I lean, and when you eat the matzah, and when she has the maror, and when he's having the afikoman, it's all happening because we haven't got to the final redemption. We've just perhaps started it. I left off with a question. Spoke about 4 questions. We said, if we talk about the 5th cup, just a 5th question to throw out there. The mitzvah of Pesach is to lean. And the reason why we lean is we know it's derech cherut, as a sort of an expression of freedom. And the question is, every time when you're leaning on Pesach night, you're kind of leaning and you're trying to make sure that your wine doesn't get all over your dress or your shirt or whatever it is. Especially if you're wearing a white shirt, bad enough if you have a tablecloth. Tablecloth usually looks more purple by the end of the seder or red. But this balancing act of leaning on the left side and trying to drink it's extremely uncomfortable. How do I know? Because only the parts which a person has to lean, like 4 cups of wine and the matzah and so on and so forth, that is when people lean. But you ask the average guy, are you leaning when you're having your piece of steak or your, tuna steak or salmon or your main course of Shulchan Aruch? Are you leaning? I don't know many people that do because it's just uncomfortable. So why would Chachamim do something which seemingly is an expression of freedom, kingship, royalty, when nobody feels comfortable that way. So granted that back in the day, the nobleman would sit in this kind of couch style setting. I forgot the word for the recliner. What's it called? The comfort couch, whatever you call it. Yeah. And there's another word for it. I can't remember an English word for it. But you're muted then.
A chaise lounge? Well, that's what I call it.
That's already,
not the fainting couch.
Reminds me of the Purim video.
Chaise lounge, I think. No? Or maybe I'm thinking of Purim.
No, I go with the chaise longue.
Yeah, that's the one?
Yeah.
Okay. So either way, so granted that was the reality then, back then, but that was only for the nobleman. Most people weren't doing that. Most people, your average man and lady, were not leaning in that reclining in that format, which would begs the question, why didn't Chachamim try to look for an expression of freedom which will be kind of a bit more, not so exclusive, be a bit more comfortable for everyone and something which everyone can relate to? That was the question.
Because the act of telling the story is an act of freedom. The ability, the time, it's an expression of freedom.
So for sure it is. There's nothing more of an expression than expressing the story. That being said, Chachamim put a great emphasis, as even in halacha, you have to, if you drank your cup or you had your matzah without leaning, you have to do it again. Why the big deal about the reclining if it's not such a big deal for us? Or if we really want to kind of hit home this home run with leaning, with reclining, then maybe make a different format of chirut, of freedom. Okay, so we left off last week, and that was just basically a quick recap. Let's talk about this week's parasha. So it happens to be this week's parasha tomorrow on Shabbat. Shabbat morning we'll be taking out 3 Sifrei Torah, which is quite a rare occurrence. Only happens approximately twice a year. Usually Shabbat Chanukah, we have the Kriya of Chanukah, we have the Kriya of let's say Rosh Chodesh, Tevet on that day, and Shabbat you have 3 Sifrei Torah. But another one is this one, Parashat HaChodesh, you have regular Shabbat, Parashat Tazria, and you have Rosh Chodesh, the reading for Rosh Chodesh. Special time, Et Ratzon, special time for prayer. It's brought down as Farim. But I want to take a look at Parashat HaChodesh. And if you have, like I mentioned before, if you have a book in front of you, a Shemot in front of you, it'll be really helpful. So Parashat HaChodesh. So what is Parashat HaChodesh? Parashat HaChodesh is really the first mitzvah given to the people as a nation. Explain to them that you will now have HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. This is chapter Yud Bet, Perek 12. Vayomer Adonai al Moshe vel Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim Amor. Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk 1. And God tells Moses and Aaron in Egypt the following. So this is commandment is being given in Egypt, and it's the very first commandment given to the nation as a whole. What is it? The mitzvah Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, ever so meaningful. So many mitzvot are geared around the Jewish calendar. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim, Bishon hu lachem Chodshei Hashana. This month should be for you the beginning of all months. It shall be for you the first of the months of the year. Interestingly enough, the currently used names of the months, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, so on and so forth, are of Babylonian origin and only came into use amongst the Jews after the destruction of the first temple. So that's a very interesting point. That's the Ramban says this, and we don't say Nisan in this context, right? But this month should be the first month. Either way, that's in terms of the breakdown of the calendar. So what do we need to know? This whole story, so what happens? God tells them, listen, new moon, new calendar date, starting from Nisan. And what you should do is You have to take the Korban Pesach, you have to slaughter it, put the blood on the doorposts, eat it with your, hiking boots ready, with your hiking sticks ready, and I'm going to pass over the houses. Pasuk Tetvav, Pasuk 15, 7 days you should eat matzot, should have no chametz in the house. And yeah. Okay. The Jews did it. They did it like Moshe and Aaron commanded them. Pasuk 28.
Rabbi, what notion of what a month is would they or could they have had? Did they suddenly follow a lunar calendar? Are they following a solar calendar? Like, what's a month?
It's a very, very good question. So we spoke about this.
Or they might, because of agriculture, know what a month is, what a cycle is.
It's a very good question. What were they doing till now? That's the question. And then we can kind of define how they're, what format they're using to change. We touched upon it a little bit in the mornings when we spoke about Zayin Adar, when Moshe Rabbeinu died, and the question is, did he die in the first Adar or the second Adar? Because it will make a big difference to when we actually apply the Yortzeit, because there's a famous argument between Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. When you have a Yortzeit in a leap year, do you keep it on the first Adar or the second Adar? Well, according to everyone, if the person who passed away in the first Adar, then in subsequent years, if the Yortzeit is in the first Adar, you would always keep it in the first Adar. Even for Sfaradim, who keep all Yortzeits the second Adar, if the person passed away in a year where it was a leap year and it was the first Adar, you would also keep it in the first Adar. That being said, we don't know when Moshe Rabbeinu died. We know he died in the 7th of Adar. So do we keep it the first or do we keep it the second? Now, if you do the math, you could probably, attempt to try and figure it out. But even if you figure out based on the years, like we have a calendar now, we know 1,000 years from now, when's the leap year going to happen? So you can work backwards as well. The question is, before Moshe Rabbeinu, before Yetziat Mitzrayim, what was happening? When was he born? He was born and he died on the same day. So he was born before this mitzvah was given. So what does that look like? Was it a leap year? Did they just not keep it? But the sun and the moon were kind of not working with each other. Like, it's complicated, but it's a good question. Let's just go straight into the question. Let's look at Pasuk Yud Zayin. Pasuk 17. They get this mitzvah to go ahead and do matzot, do Korban Pesach and everything. Pasuk 17. Ushmartem et hamatzot. You shall safeguard the matzot. Very important mitzvah. Ki be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzeti tzivotechem me'etz Mitzrayim. For on this very day I will have taken your legions out of the land of Egypt. Ushmartem et hayom hazeh ledorotechem chukat olam. And you shall observe this day for your generations as an eternal decree. So let me ask you this. When did this parasha, when was it given? Was it given before they came out of Egypt? Or was it given after they came out of Egypt? From the simple, casual reading of the Psukim, what would you suggest?
I think it's before. Isn't Yud Gimel when they leave Israel? When they leave Mitzrayim?
That's right.
Sorry? No, I'm talking about Perek Yud Gimel is when they leave.
Yeah, so then it means it's... So again, when was this parasha given? You're saying it was given before or was given after? Perek Yud Gimel is, you're correct. Well, from Shishi, from Pasuk Chavtet, that's when the Yetziat Mitzrayim happens. We'll talk about that soon. There's two parts of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We'll see. But when was this given? Before they came out of Egypt or after they came out of Egypt? Anyone?
My vote is for before. I'm assuming it was before. It's
before.
No.
Okay, so I have one problem with that. Because in the pasuk which we just said, pasuk 17, it says, look after the matot, ki be'etzem hayom hazeh hotzeti et tzivotechem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Not, I will take you out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt. Which seems to be that for sure this whole thing was said after, because
the same thing appears in Pelik Yud Gimel in terms of the time. So when Pelik Yud Gimel it says Zechor et hayom hazeh asher yatzatem mimitzrayim hayom hazeh.
What pasuk are you reading from?
I'm just reading a random Pelik Yud Gimel, chapter 13, verse 3, just randomly, or pasuk Dalet. Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. That's Perik Yud Gimel. So I'm assuming that the parasha you're referring to came before.
Okay, so this is a very good point which you're mentioning, because there is a very famous machloket between Rashi and Ramban. We've mentioned this many a time. We've already brought down the Gemara. Whether yesh mugdam u'char b'Torah or not, was the Torah written in chronological order or not? And what seems to be from a casual text of the reading that it was actually written before Yetziat Mitzrayim, because, like Ellen pointed out, the next psukim is how they got taken out. The Makat Bechorot happens, and then they get taken out. Yet, the actual commandment is given after. It was said after, written before. How do we know it was said after? Because Asher Hotzeti, Pasuk Yudzayin, Pasuk 17, that I took you out of Egypt. Pasuk 17.
It's almost like we're being given all of the information about Pesach Dorot before we actually read about Pesach Mitzrayim. Is that right? Is that accurate?
Fantastic. So that's a very, very good point. The truth is, Pesach Mitzrayim was very different to Pesach Dorot. So Pesach for the future generations does not look the same as Pesach Mitzrayim. Why is that? Well, even in the text itself, it doesn't really make sense, because the text itself says, keep Pesach for one day. Let's point it out. Yeah, basically all the psukim until now. Pasuk 11, this is how you should eat it. Motechem chagurim alechem raglechem raglechem beyedchem. Achaltem oto b'chipazon pesach mul Adonai. And you should eat it in haste. Your loins goided, your shoes in your feet, your staff in your hand. You should eat it in haste. There's a Pesach offering to Hashem. And I shall go through the land of Egypt. And then I'll take you out. And then the next pasuk, which is pasuk 15, Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. Keep Pesach for 7 days. 1 second. Should I keep Pesach for 1 day or keep Pesach for 7 days? What's the answer? There's two things going on over here. There was Pesach Mitzrayim, which is happening, and we're trying to figure out when it happened vis-a-vis the psukim in the order of the chronological order of the psukim. But then there's Pesach Dorot, which is the 7-day Pesach, which we know. We in Chutz La'aretz 8 days. But the concept of Pesach Mitzrayim seems to be not the same thing what they're keeping in Egypt. Because they keep in Egypt one thing, they have a Korban Pesach that night, they have a matzah, boom, they get kicked out midnight. So it seems to be that this whole thing makes sense, that is happening afterwards. It was all given afterwards, but for some odd reason, it's written before the actual action.
It's kind of like the story of Abraham sending Eliezer. There's this whole Eliezer, when he goes to choose a wife, the text tells the whole story. He's done everything. He's envisioned what's going to happen. And then it actually happens. It's like it's a sort of a literary tool or device here that's being used.
So there you could argue that Avraham Avinu, Ruach HaKodesh, he gives very specific instructions what he wants. And he tells Eliezer, this is what's going to, what I would like you to happen. I'm picking something very specific. And then you can argue, yeah, that's what Eliezer did. Then he goes through the whole story, he repeats it again, and they get married. But here, the question is in real time, what's happening first? Did this whole thing, this commandment of which is part of the Korban Pesach and all that, was it given prior to Yetziat Mitzrayim, or was it given after? Now, from the Psukim, it seems to be that it was given after, but it was written before. Right? Because, as we said, on this day I took you out of Egypt. What's very strange is, you look a few psukim down the road, it's the complete opposite. Just have a look. At the end of Perek Yud Gimel, and this is Pasuk Mem Gimel 43, so chapter 12, Pasuk Mem Gimel. I said Yud Gimel before, so you did. Chapter 12, Pasuk Mem Gimel, Pasuk 43. Vayomer Allah Moshe Aaron, Zot Chukat HaPasach, Kol Benecha Lechabo. Hashem says to Moses and Aaron, this is the decree of the Pesach offering. No alienated person may eat from it. It gives all the laws of a person has to have Brit Milah and so on and so forth. Jump to Pasuk 50. Vayasu Kol Bnei Israel Kasher Tzivah Adonai et Moshe et Aaron Ken Asu. And all the people of Israel did as Hashem commanded Moses and Aaron, and so they did. Pasuk 51. Vahi ba'etzem hayom hazeh. And it happened on that very day. Hotzi Adonai et Bnei Israel meretz Mitzrayim al Tzivotah. Hashem took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt in their legions. Here's the question. When did this happen? Now, it doesn't seem to make sense that Moshe Rabbeinu would be giving the instructions of how to make the Korban Pesach and who it applies to and who it doesn't apply to after it's already happened. So seemingly this whole parasha was given before, yet it's written after. Again, the first parasha, Parashat HaChodesh, seems to be written before Yetziat Mitzrayim takes place, but clearly from Psukim seems to indicate that it was actually instructed after the whole story, after they came out of Egypt.
So when it came down to Moshe scribing the Torah according to the word of Hashem, let's say, so that might have been intentional, right? What's going to be placed where?
Fantastic. But just to kind of analyze what's going on over here, the first parasha is written before Yetziat Mitzrayim, was actually instructed after the Jews came out of Egypt, Hebrews came out of Egypt. And the second parasha is the exact opposite. It's actually given after they came out of Egypt. But written
has to have been written before.
Sorry, other way around. It's written after, but it has to be given before, because that's all the instructions how to keep the Korban Pesach. So there's something very strange about going on over here.
The chronology.
The chronology. And what Ellen's pointing out is, you're 100% right. I mean, that is the machloket, which we mentioned before. Rashi Ramban, yesh mugdam ucha Torah or not? Is the Torah written in chronological order or not? And there must be a reason for it. If you look at the Chizkuni, actually points out that it's very clearly not written in chronological order. That we just see from the reading of the text. Okay. But the obvious question is, so why is it written out of order? If, like Ellen pointed out, Moshe Rabbeinu is writing Torah, al pi Adonai biyad Moshe, he's getting instructions from God exactly how to write the order of the Torah, there must be a reason why it's written completely out of order. Why should we writing it? Why should he be writing it that way? What is the message for us?
There's certain things that pertain only to what is called Passover in Egypt. Pesach Dorot, like smearing blood on your doorpost and packing up hastily and leaving. And
but the last psukim relating to Zot Chukat Pesach is specific laws which apply across the board back then and now. Well, today we don't have the Korban Pesach, but we have the concept of when we had the Bet Midrash, then we had this obligation to make sure that only people with the Brit Milah can actually have the Korban Pesach. So, that clearly applies to that, and not only to Pesach Mitzrayim. So why would it be written after when seemingly it was for sure given before? So let's take a break for a minute, and let's look at Yetziat Mitzrayim. So Yetziat Mitzrayim, Ellen touched upon this very briefly, is mentioned twice in this parasha. So we have a look at chapter 12, Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Chavchet, Pasuk 28. So the pasuk starts off, "Vayelchu veyasu bnei Yisrael kashitzvav Moshe v'Aaron kenasu," that the Jewish people, that the people went out and did what they were told by Hashem through Moshe and Aaron. They did it. The next pasuk is Vahi b'chatzi halayla, midnight struck. Cinderella lost the shoot. No, sorry, wrong story. And midnight struck, and the firstborns died. They were screaming, and Passover.
Sorry, Rabbi. Where were we there? Sorry?
So it's Shemot, chapter 12, pasuk
20, now 29.
It was 28, now 29.
Okay.
28 says they were told, they did what they were told, kept all the laws of the Korban Pesach and so on and so forth. They got ready, and then and the pasuk continues on, and they get kicked out of Egypt. And they leave Egypt, and we know they didn't have enough time to go out. Pasuk Lametet, Pasuk 39. They baked the dough. They baked the dough they took out of Egypt into unleavened cakes, so they could not be leavened. They're driven from Egypt, so they could not delay, nor had they made provisions for themselves. Okay. Beautiful. They came out of Egypt. It's great. Now, let's jump a couple of psukim. In the pasuk, in the parasha of Zot Chukat Pesach, if you look at the very last pasuk, it says at the end of chapter 12, pasuk Nun Aleph, that's pasuk 51. Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh, it happened on that very day. Hotzi Adonai b'nei Yisrael me'etz Mitzrayim al tzivotah. Hashem took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt and everything. So the question is, what's going on over here? So when exactly did they go out? We've got a whole parasha which tells us, we've got a whole pasuk Chavtet, and then the breakdown of this is what happened. They did it, and then the whole story happens. Then we've got this parasha of Zot Chukat Pesach, and the pasuk 51 says, oh, and they came out. So when did they come out? Before the pasuk, before the parasha, after the parasha? What's going on?
There's an ambiguity between present tense and past tense. So although it's seemingly in the present, it's actually a retelling of what just happened, perhaps. So in Perek Yud Gimel, in chapter 13, היום אתם יוצאים בחודש האביב. Yeah.
Hayom atem yotzim, and then Hotzi Adonai Bnei Israel in Pasuk Nun Aleph.
I'm looking in Perek Yud Gimel.
Asher Yitzatem Mitzrayim. Okay. Right, but we're talking about now this parasha, what we're talking about in Perek Yud Bet, where we have a seemingly two places where the Yetziat Mitzrayim is happening. We have all these parashiyot happening in between. We're trying to figure out when the instruction was before or after. You got like a beginning and an end, and it seems to be, it almost seems like there's two times. Let's look at another angle. If you look at the text, there seems to be that there was a two-part process. In fact, it almost looks like there's two angles at looking at the whole Yetziat Mitzrayim. What do I mean? So, here. Angle number one, perhaps, is there's a gerushin from Paro. It happens midnight. Everyone's, screaming. Paro in pajamas in the middle of the night comes running out, kicks out the Jews. Get out. So much so, it's done by Pharaoh, b'chipazon, in haste, in the middle of the night. V'lo yachlu lehitma'amea. Let's have a look at Pasuk Lamed Tet, Pasuk 39. Vayafu et habatzek asher hotziu mitzrayim ugot matzot kilo chametz. And they baked the dough they took out of Egypt to unleavened cakes, for they cannot be leavened. Ki gorshu mi Mitzrayim, for they were driven from Egypt. V'lo yachlu litmamea, for they could not delay. V'gam teda lo asu lahem, nor had they made provisions for themselves. So one angle is, look at Paro. Paro comes in the middle of the night and says, just get out. Everyone's dying. Paro is a Bechor himself, is a firstborn. He doesn't want to die. Get out. You don't have time. Boom, 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 boom. They don't have time to bake matzahs. And they're out. All right. There's another angle though. There's the angle of the Yetziat Mitzrayim from God's perspective. The type of Yetziah which came out, B'yad Chazakah, U'bizroa Netuyah. Be'etzem hayom hazeh, the later Pasuk. Pasuk Nun Aleph. Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh, hotzi Adonai et b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim atzivotam, Pasuk 51. And it happened on that very day, Hashem took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt and their Egypt. So it seems to be almost as if there's two ways to look at this. Because the truth is, there's much discussion amongst the commentators. When did Yetziat Mitzrayim actually take place? Did it take place at night? Did it take place at day? On one hand, it says, Makat Bechorot, Paro comes, kicks them out. Yetziat Mitzrayim, boom. But then it says, Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh. It was only midday, the next day they went out. So make up your mind. When they come out? So some say it's such a big country. They kicked them out at night. By the time everybody leaves the entire Egypt, what was it? 3 million people. Try to get them out with a bunch of donkeys laden with gold and silver. You got, millions of little kids and, men, ladies of all ages, from top to bottom, it's going to take you time just to get out. Just get out the front gate. Others say it means the Be'etzim Hayom Hazeh means this time frame, not necessarily a time of the day. There's many answers, many discussions about that. But the question is, it's correct. Sam pointed out the Gemara in Pesachim, a great debate, Rav and Shmuel, correct, 100%. Thank you for that. So when did they come out of Egypt? So let's have a look at this. The next pasuk, chapter Gimel, chapter 13. We mentioned Kadesh Dikol Bechor. Put on tefillin every day. We mention this pasuk, these pasukim every day. Pasuk says that the time when you're supposed to celebrate Pesach is pasuk Vav, pasuk 6. Shivat Yamim, chapter 13, pasuk 6. Shivat Yamim tochal matzot, eat matzot for 7 days. Listen to this. Ubayom hashavi'i chag ladunai. And on the 7th day, that is when you're supposed to celebrate, assumingly Pesach. Okay. 1 second. Last time I checked, Friday night, 2 weeks' time, there's Rosh Hashanah Pesach, which is 15th of Nisan, not 7 days, the end of 7 days. Okay. Ramban actually asked this question. What on earth, 7 days? On the 7th day, you should celebrate Pesach? Are you coming to tell me you should have the Seder on the 7th day? Okay. We also have this in the pasuk, which we mentioned last week. I started off with today. V'higadta lebincha bayom hahu lemor, pasuk chet, pasuk 8. V'higadta lebincha, you should tell your son bayom hahu lemor, which essentially is the undercurrent or the obligation, Torah's commandment, biblical commandment, to actually have the Leil HaSeder and say over the story. Bayom hahu lemor. On that day. What's that day? We just said it's the 7th day. So you're supposed to have Seder night on the 7th day. Have you ever thought of that? That's what it says in the pasuk. We don't do that. What's going on? So first of all, just the wording of the pasuk seems very strange. Second of all, that's not what we keep practically in halakha. We keep Seder night on the 15th. Third of all, we don't even know what happened on the 7th day. Oh, we know it because we're all very learned. But in terms of the breakdown, Yetziat Mitzrayim, we don't have much indication from the pasuk what's going on that day. Stuff going on here which seems to be a little bit uncomfortable. Like this is not the regular program. Seems to be like you're supposed to keep Seder night on the 7th day of Pesach. Sure, there'll be many people who will be very happy, but people have plans. They book the dinner to eat the first night Pesach with their family, or in Bet Midrash, or New York, or wherever they are.
Is that a genuine machloket? Has that been a genuine dispute? Is it really would Beit Hillel and Shammai kind of dispute when the actual Seder was to take place?
Well,
beginning of Pesach or at the end?
We're trying to read the Psukim. Of course, we can get into the Gemara. Okay, we're trying to see basic text. This is not like a midrash or a nice concept which we have to kind of relate to and try to bring a lesson to. Pasuk Vav, pasuk 6. Ubayom hashvi'i chag ladonai. Eat matzot for 7 days. Seems to be some clear angle there. It's not like you just start eating matzot on the 7th day. Eat matzot all 7 days. On the 7th day, make a big party. Pasuk 8. V'higadta lemincha b'yom hahu lemor. Sorry, I said pasuk 6 and pasuk 8. Pasuk 8. Tell your son on that day. Tell your son is the source for Seder night. Saying of the story. How, what, where, what we spoke about at the beginning, questions we start off with.
There's a clear indication to start the holiday on the 14th, on Yud Daled, even though it doesn't designate that it's Nisan, or does it? Does
Well,
it actually,
there we know is Nisan.
we know. So it does clearly say that the Chag has to start on Yud Daled.
But one second, we spoke about Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Dorot, right? We made a clear distinction between what happened and what we're supposed to do. Of course, it says Shivat Yamim Tochal Matzot. When does that day start? On the 15th by night, for sure. But the party, Ubayom HaShvi'i Chag LaDonai. And that's the Bayom Ahu Lemor. That supposedly is the day that you're supposed to say Vigat Alimcha.
It must have been referring to the Mimuna.
Helen, you got it. You got it. So everybody's invited to the Mimuna in our house, Pesach Session. 10:45, you're still up, cleaning Motzei Pesach. Bring out your chametz. Please join us at our house, 10:45 on Motzei Pesach. Okay. That being said, even if we have Mimuna, we still have to answer the questions. So we only have 10 minutes to be able to see what we can cover. And Bezrat Hashem, for what we don't, maybe we can continue at the Mimuna. So here's the deal. We start off with a question. When did Yetziat Mitzrayim actually start? We need a start of the story. When did it actually start? So we said, Ki gorshu miMitzrayim, that they were kicked out of Egypt. We know that was the 15th because they ate the matzah, they ate the Korban Pesach with the blood on the doorposts, and then Makat Bechorot happens, they get kicked out by Paro. And the Pasuk says, seems to be a bit of an interesting difference. Have a look at Pasuk, chapter 13, Pasuk 3. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am. Moses said to the people, Zachor et hayom hazeh, remember this day, Asher yitzatem miMitzrayim, on which you departed from Egypt, Mibeit Avadim, from the house of bondage, Ki b'chodik yad, for with a strong hand, Hotzi Adonai etchem mizeh, God removed you from here. V'lo yachel chametz, and therefore your chametz should not be eaten. Okay? Asher yitzatem miMitzrayim, on the day in which you departed from Egypt. Next pasuk, Pasuk Dalet, Pasuk 4. Hayom atem yotzeim b'chodesh Aviv. Today you are leaving. Are you leaving or have you left? Make up your mind. It says one pasuk after another. There's no like saying, oh, different chapters, I'm not sure what's happening. Like, you know, this is clearly a difference in the present tense or future tense versus the past tense. Again, Hayom hazeh asher yitzatem miMitzrayim. Remember the day in which you departed, you came out of Egypt. Next pasuk, Hayom atem yotzeim. Present future tense. On this day, you are going out of Egypt. Seems to be there are.
Rabbi, on in Pelik Yud Bet, in chapter 12, it says, I'll read it in English.
Chapter 12, pasuk what?
Chapter 12, pasuk 17 and 18. It speaks specifically about the date of when they would eat matzot, and meaning, and it refers to this is the same day that you would have left Egypt. But the understanding is it hasn't happened yet. Where it hasn't yet happened in the Torah. It's this foretelling of what's going to happen.
That is pasuk 18, 17.
Mm-hmm. 17 and 18.
It hasn't happened yet?
Definitely.
Hasn't happened yet, seemingly, but it doesn't say that in
And
the
he shall
pasuk.
observe the feast of unleavened, for in this self same day, ki
This is what
be'etzem
they-
hayom hazeh, on the
Mhm.
self same day, have I brought your host son of Egypt.
Have I
Therefore,
brought?
you shall-
Hotzeti et tzivotechem eretz Mitzrayim. I took you out already. That's simple translation.
for in this self same day, ki be'etzem hayom hazeh, הוצאתי את צוותכם מארץ מצרים, ושמרתם את היום הזה לדורותיכם.
Doesn't say Otzi et tzivotechem eretz Mitzrayim. I will take you out. It says Hotzeti in the past tense. I took you out.
Except that's that kind of hotzeti, it's not clearly the past. It's kind of an implied future. I will have taken you out of Egypt. No?
That's
So the understanding is that the Pesach and the eating of matzot starts on that very same night of me taking you out of Egypt.
Yeah, but you it almost sounds like you have to read that into the pasuk, because if you look at the chronological order of events, they only came out of Mitzrayim afterwards. Yeah, but if you look at the pasuk later, for example, pasuk we just mentioned, suddenly it's Asher Yetzatem Mitzrayim, and there is a present tense, Hayom Atem Yotzeim. So it's not like the Torah has to use, it's kind of short for words. So let's always use the future tense, which sounds like past tense, but it always means future tense. No. Torah is clearly delineating a difference between future tense and past tense. And in the pasuk where it's being instructed, the Torah seems to be using a past tense, which we're trying to work out. Anyone got any input? Okay, we don't have much time, so I'm just going to mention one small idea. Based on what we said, it could be there's two angles of the same Yetziah. There are two angles on how to look at Yetziat Mitzrayim. There's angle A of Paro's perspective, which happened in the night, which is they didn't have time to prepare, no provisions, enough time to take kicked out in haste. It's a bit of a poor level, almost like like robbers, midnight, going out the dead of night. Very kind of not a very fancy, trumpets blowing coming out of Egypt, which we always imagine. Then there's the other angle. There's the angle of Yetziat Mitzrayim, where they're coming out on God's terms. This is Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, midday, all happening, no one to stop them. The Egyptians are gobsmacked. What's going on? All our slaves are leaving. Two completely different angles.
Well, actually, one can only imagine utter chaos.
Utter chaos.
Utter chaos.
For sure.
And total disaster around them.
Yeah. It must have been controlled, almost like a tornado, right? This is a controlled explosion, because to have 3 million people going out of Egypt in a uniform manner, that's the door, not that one. We're going that way. Follow the crowd. Is the message had to go out on WhatsApp.
Is that follow the crowd, you said, or follow the cloud? Follow the cloud.
Follow the cloud. Yeah, the question is when the clouds come. The clouds only come a little bit later, but whole separate discussion. That being said, it would also, if you take this angle of Asher Yetzatem and Hayom Atem Yotzim, there's this difference between, there's two types of going out. There's a going out which has already kind of happened, and a going out which will happen. One's by Paro, and one's by God. One by night, one by day. It could be all one part, one big package. We don't have to say that want to happen literally at night until the next day, whatever it is. It could be just two different angles. Whose perspective are you looking at? Are you looking at Paro's perspective, or are you looking at God's perspective? And then you look at the pasuk which says, Shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, lechem oni, ki b'chipazon yatzatem et Mitzrayim. This is pasuk in late in Sefer Devarim. Pasuk says, we eat matzot because we came out in haste. And then we just said in Shemot 12 Lametet, we said pasuk 39, Ki gorshu mi Mitzrayim lo yachlu t'mamea. They got kicked out of Egypt, didn't have a chance to kind of, get that together.
But yet it does say that they knew enough to ask of the Egyptians for their silver and their gold. That they had
time to take care of. So I've spoken about in the past that very good question. 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, I asked this question, you didn't have a chance to make a pair of sandwiches. You knew going out. Well, what's the big deal? What is this whole business that, you're trying so quickly to get out and you get kicked out so quick? You were told by God, this is the end of the road. Get ready, pack a suitcase. I know one Jewish mother who's got, a few kids under her who's going to make sure that, you go to Safeways and the, Jewish mother's going to pack up a whole suitcase of food for the kid just in case he might get hungry. You tell me you're going out to the desert? The whole family, never mind the kids, the husband. How are you going to handle that? Who's not going to prepare but a bunch of sandwiches? But that's a separate, very good question. Just to wrap up. What does matzah signify? What does cherut signify? Perhaps there's a different angle to look at it. We always looked at cherut as maybe something which is freedom. Kings, queens, princes, princesses.
Personal or collective?
That's maybe a whole different angle.
It's the same. It's part of the discussion. Chofshi is one thing. Cherut is something else. There's probably more words. They must denote something. Where's Shlomo when we need him?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Somebody get back to Shlomo.
So the truth is, when we talk about Mitzrayim, we usually use the term cherut. We're already out of time. I just want to end off. It could be there's two angles to matzah, to cherut and all that. And that is, it depends how you look. There is the Geulah, which happened on the night by Paro, kicked us out. But then there's a final redemption. The final redemption is by God. But then you can decide what that looks like. It could be the next day. It could be the end of the 7 days when they've finally gotten rid of Paro completely, when Vayaminu B'Adonai Moshe Avdo, when all the Egyptians are slain. And even psychologically, you can understand that these slaves are going to, still be in the slave mentality until they see their captors dead. Or you could say the cherut is when they come to the Matan Torah, the whole purpose of it. Or maybe when they go to Eretz Israel. Or maybe when the Bet Mikdash comes. Or perhaps even when the third Bet Mikdash will come. But that's the perspective of godliness, which comes out that when we talk about Geulah, when we talk about cherut, and we talk about the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the storyline, there's a lower level storyline and a higher level storyline. There's the Ani, the Lechem Oni, not necessarily because they ate maybe poor man's bread while they ate in Egypt, but because the beginning of the Geulah was really a low level Geulah. It was a low level freedom because they were kicked out by Pharaoh. The real Geulah happens much later on. By Yom HaShvi'i, Chag LaAdonai. It's only the 7th day, but after Kriyat Yam Suf, when God says, now you can have freedom. Now you can appreciate that the Geulah happens by God. And I think it's just so beautiful that perhaps the angle which we can take home as a lesson for us is, well, Ellen pointed out before, even if God is the one where the final freedom, final, stamp happens 7 days later or whenever it is. But we still eat matzot all 7 days. We still begin Pesach and celebrate the Seder on the first night. Because in order to enable that, the Jews had to do the first bit. They were the ones who had to put the blood on the thing, on the doorpost. They were the ones who had to slaughter the Korban Pesach. They had to get ready to get out. And you want to know how to really be able to get to a final cherut? You can't get there unless we do our bit first. And the message to the Chacham is exactly this. Of course he's supposed to say the story. That is the answer we give the Chacham. So we give to all the four sons. But you want to know what's the impact for us? What are you doing to make sure there's a final Geulah? What part of you is enabling the process to actually be realized? And when you look at Mitzrayim like that, when you look at Lila Seder like that, you're going to have a whole different way of looking at Pesach night, reclining. Yeah, maybe it is uncomfortable because perhaps the cherut is kind of this mixed, real mix, both of a low-level Geulah and a high-level Geulah, which you want to get to. Okay, we'll stop there. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.